15 years ago, my twin sister went missing. But yesterday, my daughter said, "Mom, why did I see a woman who looks exactly like you in the window?" At first, I didn't believe her. But when I checked the security camera footage from the previous day, my heart started pounding. Good day, dear listeners. It's Louisa again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. People always said Elaine and I were two halves of the same soul. Same laugh, same way of tilting our heads when we were thinking, same habit of humming while we cooked. Growing up in Dayton, Ohio, we shared everything. A bedroom, a bicycle, eventually heartbreaks and secrets whispered long after our mother thought we were asleep. When she disappeared 15 years ago, I didn't just lose a sister. I lost the person who knew every version of me that had ever existed. Life after Elaine became a quieter thing. I buried my husband, Robert, 7 years ago. A heart attack, fast and merciful, the doctors said. I raised my daughter Sarah mostly alone after that, though by then she was already grown, already married, already building her own life with her husband Tom in a sensible beige house 3 miles from mine. I became a grandmother to Lily, a sharp-eyed girl of 8 who noticed everything. My days settled into a rhythm. Coffee at 6, a walk around the block at 7, the garden in the morning, television in the evening. A life that was full enough that I didn't have to think too hard about what was missing. But Elaine was always missing. She had been declared a missing person in the fall of 2009. The police had investigated. Briefly, half-heartedly, as they often do when a grown woman walks away from a difficult marriage. Her husband, Derek Pollard, had told them she'd been depressed, that she'd talked about leaving, that he wasn't surprised she was gone. The case went cold within 18 months. I never believed a word Derek said. Not once, not ever. I kept her photograph on the mantelpiece. Sarah used to ask me why when she was a teenager. Because she is still alive somewhere, I always said, and someday she'll come home. Sarah had stopped asking years ago. She'd made her peace with the loss in the practical way young people do, but I never did. The first strange thing happened on a Tuesday. I remember it was a Tuesday because I had been to my book club that afternoon. We were reading a mystery novel, something about a woman who fakes her own death. And I had come home in a particular mood, unsettled and thoughtful. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat in the armchair by the front window, watching the street. Our neighborhood was quiet. A row of older houses with mature trees, sensible families, dogs on leashes. Nothing unusual ever happened on Birchwood Lane. But that evening, as the light was going low and golden, I saw a woman standing on the sidewalk across the street. She was facing my house. I leaned forward. My tea went cold in my hands. The woman was about my height, my build. She wore a gray coat I didn't recognize. Her hair was shorter than Elaine's had been, lighter too, almost blonde, not the dark brown we'd shared all our lives, but the way she stood, the particular stillness of her, the angle of her chin. My heart moved strangely in my chest. By the time I stood and pressed closer to the glass, she was gone. I told myself it was the book club, the novel, the mood. I told myself I was a 65-year-old woman with an overactive imagination and a grief that had never fully healed. I made fresh tea and went to bed. That was 2 weeks before Lily said what she said. My granddaughter was staying with me for the weekend. Sarah and Tom had gone to a wedding in Columbus. Lily and I had spent Saturday making pancakes and watching old animated films and playing cards. On Sunday morning, I was in the kitchen, scrambling eggs when Lily came padding in from the living room, her socks making soft sounds on the hardwood floor. "Grandma," she said, Why was there a lady outside who looks exactly like you? I set down the spatula very slowly. What lady, sweetheart? In the window. I was looking out and she was just standing there. Lily climbed onto the kitchen stool and reached for a piece of toast. She looked just like you but younger, like a copy. I walked to the front window. The street was empty. A Sunday morning, cold and bright. A few leaves skittering across the pavement. Nobody there. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, before Sarah came to collect Lily, I did something I had installed purely out of a neighbor's suggestion 2 years ago and had never actually used. I pulled up the footage from the small security camera mounted above my front door. My hands were trembling slightly as I scrolled back to Sunday morning, and then I saw her. She was standing on the sidewalk directly across from my house, just as Lily had described. The timestamp read 7:42 a.m. The quality wasn't perfect, but it was clear enough. A woman, my height, my build, standing perfectly still, looking directly at my front door. Her face was turned just enough that the camera caught her profile. I stopped breathing, because even after 15 years, even with shorter hair and a different coat and a face that had aged and changed, I knew that profile. I had seen it in every mirror I had ever looked into. It was Elaine. I sat in front of that laptop for a long time. The footage was 43 seconds long. I watched it 11 times. I counted. I paused it at the clearest frame, 7:44 a.m., just before she turned and walked away. And I stared at that face until my eyes burned. Then I closed the laptop, went to the bathroom, and sat on the edge of the tub and let myself shake. This is what grief does to a person if you let it go too long without resolution. It hollows out a small chamber inside you, and you fill it with hope, and hope is a dangerous thing to carry, for 15 years. I knew that. I had read enough about missing persons cases, had spoken to enough counselors in the early years to understand that the mind will sometimes manufacture what the heart needs most. I was a rational woman. I had been a school administrator for 22 years. I did not make decisions based on feelings alone. But this was not a feeling. This was 43 seconds of video footage. I thought about Sarah. She would be here in 2 hours to pick up Lily. I thought about what would happen if I told her what I had just seen. Sarah had worked hard to let go of Aunt Elaine. She had done the healthy thing. She had grieved and accepted and moved forward. If I told her now and I was wrong, I would break something open in her that had taken years to close. I decided, sitting there on the edge of that bathtub, that I would not tell Sarah. Not yet. Not until I knew more. I thought about the police. 15 years ago, the Dayton police had spent 18 months on Elaine's case and found nothing, or rather, found nothing they were motivated to find. The lead detective at the time, a man named Garfield who smelled of cigarettes and spoke to me in the particular slow voice men use when they think a woman is being emotional, had told me plainly that there was no evidence of foul play and that adults were legally permitted to walk away from their lives. He was retired now. The case was cold. If I walked into the Dayton Police Department with a screenshot from a home security camera and said, "I think my missing twin sister is alive and standing outside my house," what would they do? File a report, most likely. Assign it to the bottom of someone's pile. Wait. I was 65 years old. I had already waited 15 years. No, the police would be a last step, not a first one. What I knew, as I splashed cold water on my face and looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, Elaine had been standing outside my house. She had not knocked. She had not rung the bell. She had not called. She had stood at a distance and looked at my door and then walked away. That told me something important. It told me she was not free to come to me. Something, or someone, was preventing her. Derek Pollard. The name settled into my mind like a stone dropping into still water. Derek Pollard, who had married my sister in 2005 and made her smaller every year of that marriage. I had watched it happen. The careful way he managed her, the subtle undermining, the isolation from friends, and then from family. By 2008, Elaine called me half as often as she used to. By 2009, she had stopped talking about him at all, which was worse than the complaints. And then in September 2009, she was simply gone. Derek had told the police she left of her own accord. He had cried at the right moments and spoken of her depression and cooperated fully with the investigation. He was very good at appearing cooperative. I had never been able to prove he was lying. I had never stopped believing he was. Where was Derek now? I realized I had not thought about him directly in perhaps 2 years. I had made a deliberate choice, at some point, to stop tracking him. It was making me ill, the constant watching and waiting for him to do something wrong. I knew he had remarried. I knew he had moved. But I did not know where. That was the first thing I needed to find out. I dried my face and went to the kitchen and opened the laptop again. Not to the security footage this time, but to a fresh browser window. I was methodical about it. I started with what I knew. His full name, Derek Allen Pollard. His approximate age, 61 or 62 now. His profession at the time of Elaine's disappearance. He had been a project manager for a mid-size construction firm in Dayton. It took me less than 20 minutes. He was living in Kettering, a suburb 12 miles south of my house. He had remarried in 2013, a woman named Brenda. He was listed as a senior estimator for a construction company out of Cincinnati. His address was a matter of public record, attached to a property tax filing I found through the county assessor's website. He was 12 miles away. My first plan was simple, and I knew it as I wrote it down in the small notebook I kept in the kitchen drawer. Find out if Elaine was with Derek, or near him, or under his control somehow. Do not approach Derek directly. Do not tip him off. Watch first. Understand first. Then act. I closed the notebook when I heard Sarah's car in the driveway. I put the kettle on and smiled at the door and said nothing at all. The first official step was not dramatic. Most real steps aren't. On Monday morning, after a night of almost no sleep, I drove to a private investigation firm I had looked up the previous evening, Hartley and Associates, located in a modest office building off Far Hills Avenue in Kettering. I had read their reviews carefully. They specialized in missing persons and domestic matters. They were licensed, discreet, and did not advertise in the flashy way that made me distrust a business. The investigator who met with me was a woman named Patricia Hartley, early 50s, compact and watchful, with the kind of face that gave nothing away easily. I told her everything. I showed her the security footage on my phone, the screenshot I had saved, the old photograph of Elaine from 2008 that I kept in my wallet. I told her about Derek, about the marriage, about the cold case. I told her about Lily standing in my kitchen saying she looked just like you but younger. Patricia watched the footage twice without speaking. Then she looked at the photograph. Then she looked at me. You understand, she said carefully, that 15 years is a long time. People change. I know my sister's face, I said. I have been looking at a version of it in the mirror my entire life. She nodded once, the way competent people nod when they have decided to take you seriously. We discussed fees. I had savings, Robert's life insurance, carefully managed. And I did not hesitate. We signed an agreement that afternoon. Patricia's first task was surveillance. She would locate Derek Pollard's residence in Kettering, confirm his current household, and determine whether any woman matching Elaine's description was present. She asked me not to approach Derek or the property myself. She was firm about this. If she's there, Patricia said, and she's there against her will, you approaching him could escalate things in ways that become dangerous. Let me establish the facts first." I agreed. I drove home and I waited. That waiting was its own particular torture. I cleaned things that were already clean. I rearranged books I had arranged perfectly well the year before. I called Sarah on Tuesday evening and listened to her talk about Lily's school play and Tom's work troubles, and I said, "Mm-hmm, and that's wonderful, honey," and told her nothing. On Thursday afternoon, Patricia called me. "Mrs. Harper," she said, "I need you to come in." Her voice told me nothing, but the fact that she called rather than emailing told me everything. I was in her office within the hour. Patricia had a folder on her desk. She opened it without preamble and turned it to face me. Inside were 3 photographs printed on standard copy paper, taken with a long-distance lens. The quality was clear enough. The first photograph showed the exterior of a house in Kettering. A brick, colonial, well-maintained, attached garage. Derek Pollard's house? Patricia confirmed. The second photograph showed a man in the driveway. Older than I remembered, heavier, with gray at his temples, but unmistakably Derek. The third photograph showed a woman in the kitchen window, visible through the glass. I pressed my hand flat against the desk to stop it trembling. The woman was approximately 60 years old. Her hair was lighter now, cut short, but the shape of her face, the particular line of her jaw, the way she stood slightly turned with one shoulder lifted, I had carried that in my memory for 15 years. "That's Elaine," I said. My voice was very steady. I was surprised by that. "I can't confirm identity from photographs alone," Patricia said carefully, "but I can tell you she did not appear to leave the house during the 4 hours I was on site on Wednesday. The car in the garage is registered to Derek Pollard only. I ran the property. There is no secondary resident listed. According to public records, Derek Pollard lives there with his wife Brenda, whom I have separately confirmed is a different woman currently traveling for work. The woman in the kitchen was not Brenda. So who is she? I asked, though I already knew. That is what we need to establish with certainty, Patricia said. I want to get closer. I want to see if I can get a face-on photograph, something we can compare definitively. And Mrs. Harper? She paused. If this is who you believe she is, you need to understand what we may be dealing with. This wouldn't just be a missing person situation. This could be unlawful imprisonment. That is a federal matter. The words landed in the room with a weight that was hard to breathe around. I had spent 15 years imagining what had happened to Elaine, and somehow, hearing the clinical, legal phrase, unlawful imprisonment, made it more real than any of my worst imaginations. I nodded. I told Patricia to proceed. I drove home on the highway with both hands on the wheel and the radio off, and I made myself think clearly about what came next. There was no going back from this. I had engaged a professional. I had documented evidence. I had a theory that was beginning to look like a fact. When we had proof, real, undeniable proof, I would go to law enforcement. Not Detective Garfield. Someone new. The FBI, if necessary. Patricia had used the word federal, and I intended to remember that. But there was one thing that kept pressing against the edge of my thoughts as I drove. If Elaine had been standing outside my house, if she had been close enough to look at my front door, then she had been out. She had been, however, briefly, unsupervised, which meant Derek's control was not absolute, which meant there might be a way to reach her. I pulled into my garage and sat for a moment in the dark of the car. Somewhere 12 miles south of me, my sister was in a kitchen window. I was going to bring her home. Patricia Hartley was thorough. That was what I had paid for, and that was what I received. By the following Tuesday, she had a second set of photographs, this time face-on, taken from a public sidewalk during the 12 minutes when the woman had stepped into the backyard, apparently to tend a small container garden near the back fence. Patricia had positioned herself in a neighboring alley with a long lens. The photographs were unambiguous. I looked at them for a long time in Patricia's office. It's her, I said. I've sent the photographs to a forensic facial recognition specialist I work with, Patricia said. I want independent confirmation before we go to law enforcement. But I want to be honest with you. I believe you. The resemblance to your photographs from 2008 is consistent with the expected aging pattern. The specialist confirmed it in 48 hours. An 87% probability match, accounting for age progression. That was not 100%, but the specialist's written report noted that under the circumstances, 15 years, possible weight change, altered hair, 87% was exceptionally high. I had what I needed. I called Patricia on Friday morning and told her I wanted to move forward with contacting the FBI. She agreed and said she would prepare the documentation package. I spent that weekend writing a detailed chronological account of everything I knew and remembered. Elaine's marriage, the deterioration I had observed, the disappearance, the cold case, the security footage, Patricia's findings, the specialist's report. I was sitting at my kitchen table on Saturday afternoon, printing the last pages, when my phone rang. The number was one I didn't recognize. A 937 area code. Dayton. Mrs. Harper. The voice was measured, pleasant in the way that things are pleasant when they're trying not to seem threatening. This is Derek Pollard. My hand tightened around the phone. I said nothing. I think we should talk, he said. I think there have been some misunderstandings. I'm not sure what you mean, I said. My voice was calm. I was genuinely surprised by how calm I was. I know you've had someone watching my house. His pleasantness dropped half a degree. That's not a healthy thing to be doing, Marjorie. After all this time. I'm worried about you. Elaine leaving was very hard on the whole family, and I've always understood that. But this is starting to look like harassment. Harassment. That was the word he had chosen. Not confusion or concern. Harassment. A legal word. A threat dressed up as concern. I'd like you to stop, he said. For your own sake. You're a grandmother. You have a family who loves you. There's no reason to stir all this up again. There are people in your life who would be very upset to see you go down this road. There it was. Not there are legal consequences of people in your life. He was pointing at Sarah, at Lily. He wanted me to understand that my choices had a radius. I'll think about what you've said, I told him. I hung up and immediately called Patricia. She was not rattled. He knows the surveillance happened. He doesn't know the extent of what we have. The call itself is useful. We should record the details while they're fresh. She walked me through everything, timestamp by timestamp, and took notes. This actually helps us, she said. The fact that he called you means he's nervous. Nervous people make mistakes, but I would be dishonest if I said his words had not found their mark. That night, I lay awake and thought about Sarah. About Lily. Derek had not made an explicit threat, but the implication had been clear enough. I can make things complicated. For you. For them. He had spent 15 years being very good at complicated. On Sunday morning, I drove to Patricia's office and delivered my printed documentation. She would consolidate it with her own materials and prepare a formal submission to the FBI's Cincinnati field office. She had a contact there, a special agent who handled domestic abuse and unlawful detention cases. This was exactly the kind of case they took seriously, she told me. Physical evidence, long-term isolation, a cold missing persons file that could now be reopened. He called you, Patricia reminded me, because he's afraid. Stay the course. I drove home and I let myself be tired. I took 3 days that I had not planned to take. I sat in my garden in the November cold and drank tea and watched the birds. I called Sarah and had dinner with her and Tom and Lily on Tuesday evening and ate pot roast and listened to Lily tell me about a boy at school who was afraid of butterflies, which made us all laugh. I did not think about Derek Pollard for those 3 days. I gave myself permission not to. But on the fourth morning, I rose at 6, made coffee, and sat at my kitchen table with my notebook. The birds were starting up outside. The light was gray and clean. I was not finished. The temptation came quietly, the way Derek always did things. It was a Friday morning, 8 days after his phone call, when a woman I had never met appeared at my door. She introduced herself as Brenda Pollard, Derek's wife. She was in her mid-50s, well-dressed in the careful way of women who have learned to manage appearances, with a practiced warmth that I recognized immediately as performance. She asked if she might come in. I stood in the doorway and looked at her. "I think we have something to talk about," she said, and her smile was the saddest thing about her. Not sad because she was suffering, sad because it was so clearly manufactured. I stepped back and let her in, not because I trusted her, because I wanted to hear what they had sent her to say. She sat at my kitchen table and accepted the cup of tea I offered, and began with a version of the truth that had been edited very carefully. She said Derek had been worried about me. She said she understood how difficult Elaine's disappearance had been on the family. She said she was sorry she and I had never had the chance to meet properly. And then she said something that was the real reason she had come. "Marjorie," she said, setting down her cup, "I don't know what you think you've found, but I need you to understand that whatever this private investigator has told you, whatever she's shown you, there are things that are more complicated than they appear. Some situations, when you open them up, hurt a lot of people who don't deserve to be hurt, like your daughter, like your granddaughter." There was that radius again, Sarah and Lily. I looked at Brenda Pollard across my kitchen table, and I felt something I had not expected to feel in that moment. Pity. Not for myself, not even for Elaine. For this woman who had married Derek Pollard and was now sitting in my kitchen doing his work for him. Whatever she knew or didn't know about the woman in her house, she was here because he had sent her. And she had come. "Thank you for visiting," I said. "Marjorie, I heard everything you said." I stood, which ended the conversation. "I appreciate that you took the time." She left 5 minutes later. She paused at the door and turned back once, and I saw something in her face that might have been an attempt to tell me something real. A flicker, quickly extinguished. Then she was gone. I wrote down the entire conversation, word by word, from memory, while it was fresh. I emailed it to Patricia. "They're escalating through indirect means," Patricia wrote back. "He's being careful not to contact you again directly after the first call. He knows that was a mistake. But this visit matters. If she repeated the reference to your daughter and granddaughter, that is a pattern of intimidation. Document everything." I was not frightened in the way Derek hoped I would be. The coldness I felt was not numbness. It was clarity. Every move he made confirmed that there was something to protect. Innocent men do not send their wives to kitchen tables in November to warn grandmothers off. I did, however, realize I could not do this entirely alone. My neighbor, Carol Beanstalk, had been my closest friend for 11 years. She was a retired family law attorney who now volunteered 3 days a week at a domestic violence organization in Dayton. I had not told her anything, and I had been wrong not to. I called her that afternoon and asked if she would come over. I told her everything, all of it, from the security footage to Patricia's photographs to Brenda Pollard's visit that morning. Carol sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Brenda had sat 3 hours earlier, and listened without interrupting. Then she asked 4 precise questions. Then she was quiet for a moment. "Marjorie," she said, "you're doing this right, but you need more support than a private investigator. Do you have an attorney?" I did not. By the end of that week, I had 2. A personal attorney, Howard Finch, who had handled Robert's estate, and through Carol's introduction, a second attorney named Dana Marsh, who specialized in victims' rights and had worked on unlawful imprisonment cases previously. Dana reviewed Patricia's documentation package and told me it was strong. Strong enough for the FBI to open an inquiry, she said. Possibly strong enough for an arrest. I sat in Dana's office on a gray Friday afternoon with Carol beside me, and I felt, for the first time in 15 years, that I was not facing this alone. Derek Pollard was watching me. I could feel it. The particular weight of being observed by someone who fears you. Let him watch. I was no longer the grieving sister in the dark. I had attorneys. I had documentation. I had a facial recognition specialist's written report and 43 seconds of security footage and a private investigator's sworn testimony. I had enough. Derek came himself the following Tuesday. I had not expected that. Patricia had suggested he would continue to work through intermediaries, keeping himself insulated. But Derek Pollard had always been most dangerous when he was frightened, and I suppose by then he was very frightened indeed. He rang the doorbell at 10 in the morning, which was calculated. He knew from whatever watching he had done that I was usually alone at that hour. I looked at him through the small window beside the door before I opened it. He was older in person than in Patricia's photographs, heavier through the shoulders, with the particular set to his jaw of a man who has controlled things for a long time and is unaccustomed to the sensation of losing control. His coat was expensive. His shoes were polished. He had dressed carefully for this, which told me he had planned it carefully. I opened the door. "Marjorie," he smiled. "I was hoping we could speak properly, without all the intermediaries." He had brought nothing, no flowers, no offering. Men like Derek do not soften themselves with gestures. They use words. I stepped back and let him in, as I had let Brenda in. I did not offer tea. He sat in the armchair across from the sofa, and I sat on the sofa, and we looked at each other across the coffee table. He spoke for approximately 20 minutes. He spoke about grief and about the damage that obsessive hope causes to families. He spoke about my health, my age, gently noted, my late husband, my daughter who worried about me. He spoke about the legal concept of harassment and about what a prolonged campaign of surveillance might look like to a judge. He spoke about how much he had always respected me and how painful the last 15 years had been for him as well. He said he had grieved Elaine, too, in his own way, and that watching her family suffer had compounded his own loss. It was exactly the right thing for a grieving widower to say. He was very practiced. It was a masterful performance. In another context, under other circumstances, it might have been persuasive. The man was intelligent, and he had practiced. I could hear the practice in it, the places where the phrasing was slightly too smooth, the pauses that were half a beat too long to be genuine. And then, when he had finished the soft part, he shifted. "I think," he said very quietly, "that you should think very carefully about your granddaughter. Children are resilient, but they can be affected by disruption in ways we don't always see immediately. A grandmother who is perceived as unstable, let's say, that has effects on custody arrangements, on family dynamics. I would hate to see Sarah put in a difficult position." There it was, naked and unambiguous, wrapped in the thinnest tissue of concern. He was threatening Lily, not directly. He was too careful for that. But he was threading the word custody into a sentence about my mental stability, and he was looking at me steadily as he said it. And he wanted me to understand. He wanted me to sit with the image of my granddaughter caught in the crossfire of something I had started. He was a man who had spent 15 years learning exactly how to find the place in a person that hurt the most, and he had found mine. I sat very still, and I said, "I appreciate you coming, Derek. I really do. I know this took courage." He blinked. He had expected fear or argument or tears. "I want you to know," I continued, "that I have documented our conversation from the moment you arrived. I would also like you to know that my attorney, Dana Marsh, you may know her work, Was briefed on your potential visit this morning, as was my neighbor Carol Beanstalk, who is a former family law attorney. Everything you have said today has been noted." I paused. "Is there anything else you'd like to add?" The color in his face changed. He stood. The warmth was entirely gone now. What was underneath it was not rage exactly. It was something colder and more calculating, the face of a man recalibrating. "You're making a serious mistake," he said. "You might be right," I said pleasantly. "I've made mistakes before. I find them much easier to correct than the alternative." He left without another word. I locked the door behind him, and then I sat very still on the sofa for about 5 minutes. Because I would be dishonest if I said I wasn't afraid. I was. The threat about Lily had landed somewhere deep and cold in me, precisely where he had intended. He had chosen the one leverage point that could reach me, and he had used it without hesitation, and the fact that it had been delivered so smoothly told me he had done this kind of thing before, chosen the softest target, and pressed. But here is what I also knew. Fear, when it is legitimate, is information. It was telling me that Derek Pollard was cornered. Cornered men like Derek did not become more dangerous over time. They became more desperate, and desperate men made mistakes. I called Dana Marsh and reported the conversation in full. She listened and then said, carefully and precisely, "Marjorie, this changes the timeline. We need to move faster." I agreed. I was afraid. And the fear, rather than stopping me, had become the last piece of fuel I needed. Dana moved faster than I expected. The documentation package she submitted to the FBI's Cincinnati field office on Wednesday morning was 47 pages. It included Patricia Hartley's sworn investigative report, the facial recognition specialist's written analysis, my time-stamped account of every interaction, including both of Derek's intimidation attempts, Carol Beanstalk's statement as a witness to my account of those interactions, and my own detailed written history of Elaine's marriage and disappearance, cross-referenced with the original missing persons case number from 2009. The FBI opened a preliminary inquiry on Thursday. They moved carefully, which I understood. They had to. An unlawful imprisonment allegation required establishing that a crime had actually been committed and that the person in question was being held against their will, rather than simply living privately. But Dana's contact at the Cincinnati office, a senior agent named Reeves, told her within 48 hours that the case had been assigned and that their investigators had conducted their own preliminary surveillance of the Kettering property. What they found confirmed Patricia's findings, and they found something Patricia had not: that the woman in the house had no verifiable identity documentation attached to Derek Pollard's address, that she appeared to have no social media presence, no employment history, no medical records at any area facility under any name that matched her description, all of which were consistent with a person who had been living under someone else's control for a long period of time. Agent Reeves described this to Dana as a digital absence that is itself a form of evidence. A real person living freely in the United States in the 21st century leaves traces. This woman had left none. I was told to be available. I was told to keep my phone close. The call came on a Saturday morning at 7:41 a.m. "Mrs. Harper," Agent Reeves said, "we are executing a welfare check at the Pollard residence this morning, with the potential for criminal charges depending on what we find. We would like you available by phone. We may need you to speak with the individual at the residence to facilitate voluntary cooperation." I said yes. I sat in my kitchen with Carol beside me and my phone in both hands. Carol had arrived at 7 without me asking, because she had known. She made coffee and we sat and we waited and did not speak very much, because there was nothing to say that would make the waiting easier. At 8:53 a.m., Agent Reeves called again. Mrs. Harper, I need to ask you something. Can you describe a distinguishing physical characteristic of your sister that would not be apparent from photographs? My mind went very still, and then I said, without hesitation, she has a small scar, crescent-shaped, on the inside of her left wrist. She fell from our backyard tree when we were 9 years old. 3 stitches. There was a pause. Please stay on the line, Agent Reeves said. What followed was 4 minutes and 20 seconds of background sound. Voices I couldn't fully make out. Movement. The distant acoustics of a house. A door opening somewhere. A woman's voice saying something I couldn't distinguish. And then a silence, and then a sound I had not heard in 15 years. A voice. Older than I remembered. Rough in a way it had never been, as though something in it had been worn down through years of careful, quiet survival. But unmistakable. Marjorie? I couldn't speak for a moment. It's me, the voice said. It's Elaine. I will not try to describe what that was. Some things are beyond description. I will say this. Carol had her arm around me before I knew she had moved. And I held the phone in both hands and I said my sister's name, and she said mine. And we both cried in the particular way that you cry. When something has been lost so long, you had made your peace with never having it again. Not the sharp grief of fresh loss, but something older and stranger. The grief of 15 years coming undone all at once. Derek Pollard was arrested at the Kettering property at 9:17 that morning. He was charged with unlawful imprisonment and identity document fraud. Investigators found, in a locked filing cabinet in his home office, Elaine's original identification documents, her driver's license, her social security card, her passport. He had taken them in 2009 and kept them for 15 years, as methodically and deliberately as another man might keep receipts. The cabinet was locked with a combination he had not shared with anyone. Elaine had not known where it was. Brenda Pollard was also present at the arrest. She was questioned at length. Her cooperation with investigators that morning, which was apparently substantial and immediate, suggested that she had known something, perhaps not everything, but something, and had been waiting for a reason to say it. I thought about the flicker I had seen in her face at my front door weeks earlier, the thing she had almost said and hadn't. Perhaps that had been it. At the police station later that afternoon, I sat across a table from my sister for the first time in 15 years. She was different. Of course she was, but she was also exactly the same in the ways that mattered. The tilt of her head, the particular steadiness of her gaze, the way she reached across the table and took my hand without preamble, the way she always had, all our lives, as though no amount of time or distance made the gesture anything other than natural. I stood outside your house, she said. He let me go on errands sometimes. He thought I was too afraid to do anything. I stood there twice, trying to make myself knock. I couldn't. I was so afraid of what he'd do. She paused. But Lily saw me, and I thought that might be enough. It was. The weeks that followed moved with the particular velocity of things that have been held still too long. Elaine was taken to a hospital for a comprehensive evaluation the day of her rescue. She was malnourished, not severely, but chronically, the kind of sustained deprivation that accumulates over years rather than weeks. She had untreated dental problems and a healed fracture in 2 ribs that had never been properly set. Injuries she could not fully account for, which the physician noted carefully in his report as consistent with a history of physical coercion. The medical records were documented in full and added to the federal case file. The emergency room physician who examined her filed his own independent report, unprompted, because he said he had worked in emergency medicine for 26 years, and he knew what chronic control looked like in a body. I was at the hospital within 2 hours of her rescue with Sarah. I had called Sarah from the car on my way over. That phone call was one of the hardest I had ever made in my life, and also one of the best. Sarah had cried so hard she had to pull her car over, and I had listened to her cry and said, I know, she's safe, she's here, she's real," until she could drive again. Elaine was in the hospital for 4 days for observation and initial assessment. On the second day, when she was stronger, a victim's advocate named Renee, who worked with Dana Marsh's office, began meeting with her. Elaine was legally clear. She was a free person. There had been no charges against her. She was a victim of a federal crime. Her identification documents were returned to her by court order within 72 hours of the arrest. The process of restoring her legal identity, Social Security, driver's license, medical records, was underway within the week, guided by Renee, who had done this for other women and knew exactly which offices to call in which order and what to say when the bureaucracy stalled. Derek Pollard did not post bail. His attorneys tried and tried with considerable resources. He had retained a firm from Columbus that specialized in federal defense. But Dana Marsh and Agent Reeves's office had prepared thoroughly, and the judge at the bail hearing cited the severity and duration of the alleged offense, the evidence of sustained document fraud across 15 years, and the 2 documented intimidation incidents involving me as grounds for remand. He was not a flight risk in the conventional sense, the defense argued. The judge disagreed. Derek sat in a federal detention facility in Cincinnati from the day of his arrest forward. His trial took 11 months. I attended every day I was able. I sat in the gallery and I watched Derek Pollard sit at the defense table and listen as the evidence was laid out, piece by piece, in front of a jury of 12 people who had no reason to find him charming and every reason to find the evidence compelling. The facial recognition report, the medical records with their careful clinical language, the filing cabinet with Elaine's documents, photographed and cataloged, Patricia Hartley's testimony, delivered with the flat precision of someone who has spent a career as a professional witness. My own testimony, which I gave clearly and without trembling on a Tuesday morning in October, looking at the jury and not at Derek. Elaine testified, that was the day Derek lost. She sat in the witness stand and she spoke for 2.5 hours. She was precise. She was calm in the way that people are calm when they have finally been given the room to say the true thing out loud. She described the escalation of control that had begun within the first year of the marriage. Small things at first, the kind of thing you explain away. She described the confiscation of her documents in 2009, done without warning, done while she was asleep, so that she woke one morning simply without the paperwork that made her legally real. She described the years of isolation, the monitoring, the single cellular phone she was permitted to use only when he was present. She described standing outside my house twice, her heart hammering, unable to make herself knock. She described seeing Lily in the window, a little girl with her face pressed to the glass, looking right at me, and knowing with the particular clarity of a woman who had been deciding to survive for 15 years that this was the moment that would not come again. Derek's defense attorneys had few tools left by the time Elaine stepped down. The physical evidence was categorical. The documentary evidence was categorical. The witness testimony, including Brenda Pollard's, was substantial. The defense's central argument, that Elaine had chosen this life, that her presence in the house was voluntary, collapsed against the fact of the filing cabinet. No one who has chosen to stay removes their own right to leave. The jury deliberated for 9 hours. Derek Allen Pollard was convicted on all counts: unlawful imprisonment, federal identity document fraud, and 2 counts of witness intimidation relating to his visit to me and Brenda's visit on his behalf. He was sentenced to 22 years in federal prison. The judge, in delivering the sentence, used the phrase systematic and deliberate erasure of another person's autonomy, and the courtroom was very quiet when she said it. He would be 83 years old at the earliest point of his release, assuming good behavior, which his attorneys were careful to note. The judge noted it as well and adjusted accordingly. His attorneys appealed. The appeal was denied. Brenda Pollard, who had provided testimony for the prosecution in exchange for consideration, received a suspended sentence and probation. I had complicated feelings about Brenda, but I understood in the end that she was someone Derek had also managed carefully, that the marriage had its own particular coercions, and that she had ultimately done the thing she had to do when given the chance. I did not need to forgive her. I simply did not need to carry her. The house on Birchwood Lane was full that Christmas. Sarah brought Tom and Lily. My old friend Margaret drove up from Cincinnati. Carol came with a bottle of wine I still remember as the best I have ever tasted. And Elaine sat at my kitchen table. The table where Derek had sat, and Brenda, and where I had spent so many sleepless nights writing things down in notebooks. And she helped me make the pie crust the way our mother had shown us both, pressing the fork tines around the edge in the pattern we had done since we were children. Lily climbed up next to her great-aunt and watched her hands with the frank curiosity of 8-year-olds. "You really do look exactly like Grandma," Lily announced. Elaine laughed. It sounded like mine. Spring came, and with it, a life I had stopped believing was possible. Elaine moved into my house for the first year. Not because she had to, but because we both wanted it. Wanted the particular comfort of waking in the same house and knowing the other was there. We fell back into old rhythms with the ease that surprises you, the way a song you haven't heard in 20 years comes back to you, note by note. She remembered where I kept the spare key. I remembered she took her coffee with too much sugar. Small things. The architecture of a shared life. Her legal rehabilitation took time, as these things do. But Dana Marsh's office had experience with identity restoration for victims of prolonged control. And by March, Elaine had a new driver's license, an updated Social Security record, and an active medical file. In April, she saw a dentist for the first time in years, and her relief when it was over was so sincere it made me laugh, and she laughed too, and the dental receptionist gave us both a slightly concerned look. Elaine began seeing a therapist in February, Dr. Angela Forsyth, who specialized in trauma recovery and domestic abuse survivors. I sat in the waiting room the first time, reading a magazine I didn't take in at all, and when Elaine came out after 50 minutes, she looked as though something very heavy had been set down. She saw Dr. Forsyth every week for 2 years. She still sees her every other week, even now. What Derek's world looked like, by contrast, was a story that arrived in pieces over the following year. His legal fees had been enormous. The house in Kettering, which was in his name, was seized as part of the civil forfeiture proceedings related to the document fraud charges. Brenda, in the wake of the trial, filed for divorce. She was entitled to do so, and she did so quickly, and the settlement left Derek with very little. His professional reputation was comprehensively destroyed. The construction firm in Cincinnati terminated his employment the week of his arrest and issued a press statement that his conduct was inconsistent with the company's values, which was the precise corporate language for "we want no part of this." The appeal, which his remaining attorney filed in the second year, cost what little he had left in accessible funds. It was denied. The attorney withdrew from the case afterward. I did not spend time thinking about Derek in prison. That was something I had worked out with my own therapist. Yes, I had found one too, a gentle man named Dr. Walsh, who asked good questions and never told me what to feel. He helped me understand that the years I had spent watching and waiting for Derek had cost me something, and that the work now was not about Derek at all. It was about what came next for me. What came next was good. Sarah and I grew closer than we had been since she was a teenager. The shared experience of Elaine's rescue and the trial had remade something between us. She stopped managing me, the way adult children sometimes manage aging parents, and started talking to me the way she had when she was young, openly, the way Elaine and I had always talked to each other. It was a gift I hadn't known I was missing. Lily turned 9, then 10. She was a reader, like me, and she developed a habit of sitting on my sofa on Saturday mornings with a book while Elaine and I had coffee at the kitchen table. She never made a fuss about it. She simply appeared, book in hand, as though she had always been there. I loved this about her more than I can say. Elaine, at 62, began to rebuild. She took a part-time position at a local library. She had always loved books, had been a librarian's assistant in her 20s before the marriage swallowed that too. And the work suited her in the way that quiet, purposeful things suit people who have been through a great deal of noise. She was not the Elaine of 2008. She was someone different. Someone who had survived something I could barely hold in my mind even now. But she was herself. That was what mattered. We began talking in the second year about traveling together. We had always meant to go to Scotland. Our grandmother on our father's side had been from the Highlands, and we had talked about it since we were girls. In October of the second year after the rescue, we booked the flights. I sat at my kitchen table the evening we made the reservation, with Elaine across from me and her coffee cooling, because she always forgot to drink it while it was hot, and outside the window the street was quiet and dark, and I thought, this is what was taken, and this is what was returned. I was 67 years old. I had my sister back. I had my daughter, my granddaughter, my neighbor Carol, my garden, my books, and a plane ticket to Scotland in October. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. If there is one thing I carried out of 15 years of waiting, it is this. Love that is real does not expire. It waits. It watches. It does not stop believing, even when believing is unreasonable. Derek Pollard counted on my grief making me passive. He was wrong. I was a 65-year-old grandmother with a security camera, a notebook, and a refusal to be managed. That was enough. So I ask you, if you had seen that footage, if you had heard your granddaughter say she looked just like you, what would you have done? Would you have let it go? I hope you wouldn't. Thank you for being here for this story. If it moved you, leave a comment below. I read everyone. And if you know someone who needs to hear that it is never too late to fight for someone you love, please share this with them.